President Trump signed an executive order calling for another 7 government entities to reduce staffing, among them the Interagency Council on Homelessness and the Institute of Museum and Library Services.
Our coverage continues on the ruling requiring many federal agencies to rehire probationary workers. We wanted to know what happens now. New tonight, I spoke with David Super. He's a professor at Georgetown University Law Center. He said if federal agencies don't comply with the court order, they'll be held in contempt.
A number of agencies have disregarded court orders up to this point, and my suspicion is that the courts are getting tired of that and that there could be sanctions if they don't comply with the court order.
I also asked what the next move could be for the Trump administration. An appeal is likely, but first it has to go to a court of appeals. Then 3 judges will be chosen at random to consider the merits of what happened in district court.
If they do that and they don't like the decision, then they could appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court doesn't have to take their case. But on a matter of this importance, I'm guessing it probably would.
Professor Super believes the Trump administration has been disregarding civil service law, namely that a number of the personnel actions have been coming from DOJ. Super said they have no authority to fire anyone besides DOJ employees.
If they think we don't need as many people at the Department of Transportation, they're free to ask Congress to rescind that money. There's an expedited procedure. It can't be filibustered. They can do that. But they haven't done that so far the way the law requires.
Professor Super believes probationary employees should go back to work right now, but he says this is far from over.
Paul, it's really good to get your perspective on this. What we're seeing is the soft data and the vibes deteriorate. When does that lead into that hard data? What's the lag time?
Well, if I believe some of what I was hearing on your own program, some of the consumer-facing, businesses are already seeing it. So it probably starts to show. I mean, you got to bear in mind that even, when we get data for March, it'll actually be data for the first half of March, really. And so it'll take a while before it's really in the numbers. But if this is for real, if consumers are as upset as they say they are, this is going to be a pretty heavy blow to the economy.
And that raises the silly question for me of are tariffs actually inflationary, which raises the question, are we in a trade war or a tariff war? And a tariff's one-time cost increase versus a trade war that can be really prolonged.
Well, I think we are in a trade war, but even so, I mean, if it's 25% tariffs on everything around the world, even that is a one-time pop in prices unless it somehow feeds into a continuing process. And one of the great unknowns here, I mean, there's so many unknowns, but one of the great unknowns is whether it's a one-time hit, whether it's something like a pop in the price of oil, which the Fed ignores because it believes that those don't lead to sustained inflation, or is this something that's going to sort of dislodge, destabilize inflation expectations and end up being a longer-term problem. And I don't know. The point is actually nobody knows, which is part of this environment of extreme uncertainty that is now surrounding everything.
So how much stock, though, should we put into this type of survey data on longer-term consumer expectations? Because I went back and looked at what some of that survey data looked like in 2017 when we were kind of starting up the first sort of batch of Trump tariffs during his first term here. And you did not necessarily see that type of pessimism so soon in the process.
Yeah, this is kind of unique. I mean, it's actually stunning how fast consumer expectations have deteriorated. I wrote about this on my Substack today. That I thought I thought we would have a few months at least of people feeling good. Great, we've got a businessman president, he's going to bring things under control, but the combination of this, not just the tariffs, but the on-again, off-again, on-again, off-again tariffs, the confused rhetoric, and I think also the crazy stuff, we're going to annex Canada, has dislodged people's certainties about the future much, much faster than, I think it's probably a record. I don't think anybody's ever seen them deteriorate so fast under a new administration.
It raises a lot of questions, too, about monetary policy and what effect it can even have in this particular environment, not only given the speed of changes, but as you kind of alluded to, the idea that whatever changes today could change potentially next week, and for a Fed that, at least admittedly, is somewhat a little bit more long-term focused. I mean, how do you even go in there and have an honest conversation about what economic conditions are going to be like? I'm really interested to see their summary economic projections next Wednesday, but how much can I trust those projections given how erratic fiscal policy, or at least I should say Washington policy, has been?
Yeah, the Fed, remember, the Fed is intelligent people, but who basically have the same information that you and I do. So they're as much at sea as the rest of us. And one thing that I think is special is that the uncertainty, there's on again, off again, who knows what actually, what's going to be posted on Truth Social tomorrow, is itself a force depressing the economy. I mean, suppose you're a business trying to decide on between two investments. One of those investments makes sense if we are actually going to have 25% tariffs. The other makes sense if we don't have 25% tariffs. And if we don't, either investment will be a big loss if you've guessed wrong. So what you probably do is you sit on your hands. You don't invest. This has got to be exerting a depressing effect on business spending, probably on consumer spending. We may not see it in the hard data yet, but we've talked endlessly about uncertainty as a possible drag on economic activity, and measures of uncertainty are completely off the charts now. It's never been nothing, except at the worst of the pandemic. But we're managing, things look fine. Unemployment is low, inflation is still pretty low, but economic uncertainty is at levels normally associated with major natural disasters.
Yeah, I've been hearing from business leaders like it's a pause button for now, not dump projects, but pause. Drilling down into tariffs a little bit here, what part of the rebalancing of the trade routes and the trade balance do we need to actually address? Like, what's legit here?
It's not at all clear that there's really a problem. I mean, for the most part, the U.S. runs a trade deficit. It's the counterpart of capital inflows. It's the arithmetic. If foreigners are investing in your country, then you have to run a trade deficit. And for the most part, the U.S. runs a trade deficit because the rest of the world thinks America is a good place to invest. And it's not clear exactly what the issue is that's supposed to be resolved here. It's also not even clear that tariffs will reduce the trade deficit, because other things being the same, if we import less, that will strengthen the dollar, which means that we will export less. So what they will do is they'll shrink the total amount of trade and raise costs and raise inflation, but not even necessarily do anything measurable to the trade deficit.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the dollar, because we do have a wide trade deficit, yet the dollar still remains strong, and that's not counting any of the issues that we're putting on here. Is that a problem, and what do we do about that?
Well, again, if we're at full employment and and we are, at least for the moment still, there's some hints of weakness, but a full employment economy, it's not clear why a strong currency is a problem. I mean, back when we were a depressed economy in the aftermath of the financial crisis, then the strength of the dollar was a problem. But right now, why exactly are we concerned about it? I mean, we seem to be inventing. I mean, we seem to be inventing problems that aren't really problems. It's kind of like, drug smuggling from Canada, which basically doesn't happen and yet has become central to our trade policy, apparently. So the strong dollar, I mean, there are some things we could wish. Maybe the U.S. had higher savings and didn't rely as much on foreign capital, but there's no acute issue here.
President Trump signed an executive order calling for another 7 government entities to reduce staffing, among them the Interagency Council on Homelessness and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. That second one utilizes grants, research, and policy development to support libraries and museums in the U.S. We got a statement from the Seattle Public Library that says it does not rely heavily on funds from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, but, quote, it is an important important source of funding for libraries nationwide. The executive order is also impacting the parent agency of U.S.-backed media outlet Voice of America. It's overseen by the U.S. Agency for Global Media and operates in more than 40 languages online. The head of each organization must submit a report confirming compliance with the order within 7 days. If they don't, they risk losing their federal funding.